It is Friday, May 30th. Man, how this year has gone by. So anyway, thanks again for another session, number 29 of Uncle Pete's Corner. And you're going to talk about WebDev today, huh?
Yes, I am.
Loopers, and you're going to use WebDev 19. Oh my
Yes,
God.
yes,
All
yes.
right.
We are. We are
Okay.
firmly into 19 now.
Okay, so I'm going to let you go unless, um, two things, announcements. One, the WebDev Con, WX DevCon. Check out the website for that, and also, um, what's his name?
Glenn?
No, not Glenn, but um, who used to work with Andy?
Oh,
Uh,
Terry. The
yeah,
the
Terry.
Area
Yeah,
51.
yeah, Exchange 51. Check that out. If you don't know about it, ask Terry, but he needs more people signing up.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that'll provide yet another area for us to have support and communications.
so with no further ado, it's yours, buddy. Go
All
for it.
right. Morning, everyone from Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm on the road this morning, so like me and Arnold were saying, I'm living on just one monitor this morning off the laptop, so I'm a little handicapped, so may have to sputter around a little bit. You may hear some papers flipping since my notes are on paper. So 1980. But what we're going to go over today is, and again, this is a prime example of the type of stuff I do with mentoring and those sort of things is had a client contact me because they were needing a good example of a WebDev Looper that had a header break that was being controlled by an image. And I happened to have some laying around, so I dusted one off, cleaned it up for him, documented it, got it back to him, and instead of him spending a day struggling with it, I was able to give him some documented code, and he only had to pay for a couple hours of my time, which saved him a lot of money, and made mama happy at home for me. And now you all are reaping the benefits of that, because once I've got that all documented, I can easily turn that into a web article too. So that's the advantage of doing the mentoring and those sort of things. So anyway, what we're doing this morning is we're doing a frequently asked question section of a website, and this one is very ugly because really all we're about here is how we would do it, and then from there you can make it pretty and do whatever you want with it. Once you start using loopers with breaks, you'll find that there's a lot of uses for them, and it can make for much more richer interfaces. But they're kind of fussy and a little tricky, and you got to kind of get how you do them. But once you do, I mean, I I have done some very complicated parent-child style data entry screens and WebDev Loopers using breaks. Once you really start getting into them and using them. So this is a very simple example that everyone should be able to relate to. We've all been on some website that had a frequently asked questions section. So, and this will kind of get you some exposure to how they work in a nice, simple example that you can then start taking it and expanding upon it. So let's take a look at what we're creating. This is the final product. As you see, I've just got some test data in here. So we've got some categories for different sections of our frequently asked questions. And then under each category, there's some questions and then the answer for that question. And we can click on and collapse category 2 or expand category 2. And as you see, when we do that, the image for that category changes from a plus and a minus. So that's the end product that we're trying to create. This is the header of the looper. This is the bodies of the looper. And then as you see, when it breaks, we hit a new category. It adds a new header, and then the individual entries below that for that particular category. So that's what we're trying to create. So let's run through the app and take a look at exactly what we've got going on. It's the analysis just has two tables in it, a category and then an entry. The entry is the actual one specific question and the answer to that question. And then you see that it's linked back to the category. So category is the parent, entry is the child. It's typical parent-child database design that we all do day in and day out. So that's our database design. The next part, and really the trick to doing a looper with a break, is that you can't, it's not like they've given you an interface where you can say, okay, here's the parent table, here's the child table, create me a looper with a break. They haven't done anything like that. So what you have to do is flatten out your database. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a query so that I have one record for every entry, and then each one of those records is going to have the category on it. So I've flattened it out into a flat file design. If you've done data warehousing, anything like that, you're denormalizing your data. You're flattening it back out. So we'll take a look at that query. And it's pretty simple. We've got all the fields from entry and category, and we're sorting on the category ID. And as you see here, we're doing a join that we're including categories that do not have an entry. So if there's no questions, we're still going to get that category header. And now if we run this, like I said, you see every question and answer, and you see the category repeated so that every question that's in category 1, we see that. Every question's in category 2, on down the line. And it's actually sorted by this category ID so that we're able to break on it later.
Hey, Pete?
Yes, sir.
So if you have a category that doesn't have a question yet, that wouldn't exist on that list.
This would, because I checked, because of that, I checked the include category that have no entries. So what we would see is a entry.
You don't have an example of one that's not.
Yeah, I don't have an example, but what we would see is category 5, and these fields over here would be null.
Okay.
Yeah, that's if we look at that, if you're more comfortable with SQL, you see that that's actually creating a left outer join is what that's doing instead of an inner join. And for some reason, I always do left outer joins, but a lot of times when you generate a query from within the query editor, they seem to like to create right outer joins and flip the tables around. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's the same definition, whether you put the tables in one order and do a left or the other order and do a right. It's just they always seem to write the statement backwards the way I would. But I guess that's their prerogative.
I'm going to do it the Uncle Pete way.
There you go. That's always what I find best.
Cool.
All right. So now we're going to start out. We're going to do a very simple looper that has a break on it, and then we'll come back and add the image stuff to it later. So let's go look at our simple example here. And this example works just like the one with the image, except you see we don't have an image. And if we click anywhere in that header area, it's going to expand and collapse. Quiz for you, Arnold. How much code do you think that example takes?
One line.
You're off by one line. It takes 0 code. There's no code on this procedure whatsoever.
No way.
Can't get a control.
Just because you had that flattened table, you could do that.
Right, because of the flattened table and all the settings on the looper, we're able to do that strictly by checking options in the looper. So when we go through here, we see that I've defined it as a classic looper. I almost always use classic loopers. Ajax loopers give you that look of a looper inside a scroll bar thing, which just
no.
I don't see that interface used anywhere. I'm not sure why you would do that. Loopers are more of a pagination kind of thing, not a you scroll through hundreds of records inside a little scroll box. But that's what Ajax is about. So I almost always do classic. And in this example, I've got it set for 0, which means that if there's 1,000 rows, they're all going to display on the screen. I'm not doing any pagination. That's the reason we're doing the expanding and collapsing, is so that you can look at whatever section you particularly want to. And one last thing to make sure of is over on the content, make sure that it is loaded in memory, because if it's not loaded in memory, it's going to have trouble with figuring out the breaks and so forth. And it especially becomes true on our next example. So since I'm displaying them all, I just go ahead and load them in memory. That way, it sucks them all in and then does everything in memory instead of trying to do any kind of direct file access once it has.
Hey, Pete.
Yes.
So if it's in memory and you got a million people hitting this site at the same time, is that going to be a load on the server?
If I was creating a WebDev site that had 1 million people hitting it once, I would create it as an AWP site, not as a WebDev Dynamics site. So that means that it would build it, ship it off to the browser and forget about it. So it'd be in memory on their side, not my side.
Okay.
But yes, in a true WebDev Dynamics site, everything I load in memory is eating up some server memory. But for the most part, WebDev Dynamics sites are intranet sites, business app sites, so that you typically don't, they're not Amazon sites. You're not having that kind of a workload of people on them. Anytime you think you're going to have that kind of number of users, you need to be looking at AWP. So I won't go into the basics of loopers. If you've worked with loopers much, you know that you put controls. In this case, I did statics inside your looper, and then you create attributes linked to those particular controls. And then, as you see, my content of my looper is that query that we created that flattens everything out. So then if we look at category, the attribute for category is linked to the category static, and then linked to just category description from the query. So that's all straightforward looper stuff. Nothing out of the norm there at all, until we get into the breaks section. And if we come back up here and look at the content of the looper, you'll see this section down here that defines a break. And when I first started out, this wasn't here, and I had to click over here, and what it was like was it was over there, and I had to move it over here. So this is everything that can possibly be broke, that you can define a break on. Which in this case, it knew that the query was sorted by category ID, so that was the only break I could do. If I had sorted on a multi-key, it would have gave me both fields as options. It's that typical type of thing. So all I did was define that I wanted it to break on the category ID. Remember, we're sorting on the category ID, so now every time the category ID changes, we'll get a break. And then it automatically added, when I did that, it added a header and a footer to my looper. And you can see those defined up here. Normally your looper looks like just a solid box. Let's create another looper real quick. Normally your looper, well, because I defined that one as classic 0. Normally your looper looks like that. And when you add a break to it, then you get these extra little margin sections for a header and a footer. So as you see, what I did was up in that header section, I put that category static up there, so it's only going to display when there's a header break, not on every break. And then if you see, after I define the break, there's also this little checkbox down here that says collapse and expand breaks via a simple click in the background. That's what's doing that expanding and collapsing of the headers when I click on them, is simply because I turned that checkbox on. Like I said, no coding whatsoever. All I did was define the descriptions, link everything up, create my query, and we're off to the races. Everything works without any hand code whatsoever. Now, the interface for sizing and adjusting your loopers is a little different and takes a little while to get around and get used to. You're outside of your looper, you're actually adjusting your space. And if you notice, what it's doing is the entire area expands, but it's just your body of your looper that's getting that extra space. And then what you need to do is, if you need to make your header, your footer bigger, you got to come in and drag those separately. And I grabbed the wrong one there. I did not. You got to grab the header. See, now I've got blue lines around the header, and now I can make that header bigger. Actually, that was my static. There, now I got the header. And now you see I'm adjusting the header. Same with the footer. We can grab it, drag it up, and so you kind of got to play to get it sized the way you really want it, because you're adjusting 3 different sizes that are kind of interrelated. So that interface is just a little hinky, takes a little getting used to, and it's a little harder to visualize how it's going to be on the screen, because it's showing this header and footer, but of course those are only used on specific breaks. And I've tried to battle with actually getting rid of the footer if I don't need it, and I have found that it's much easier to let it leave that footer there, and if I don't need a footer, I'll just shrink it down. Or in this case, you'll notice what I'm using it for is to give me a little spacing before the next break. So instead of making my header have blank space at the top, having that footer there gives me a little blank space between the question and then the next category heading. So that's all there is to creating a nice, simple looper with breaks. You know, as I said, you know, no hand code whatsoever. Pretty simple. You just set up all your options and away you go. No coding at all. That's example number 1. Now the only thing we need to do to this example is we want to add the image and have it controlled by the image, and instead of just a click in the background, we want to have an image on there, and we want that image to flip from a plus to a minus. So now we take that exact same looper that we started with. There's very few changes. The first thing we do is we go into the looper description, and the difference you'll see here is I added an attribute for the button image. It's not linked to anything, and we'll cover why that is shortly. But then the other thing I did was on the content. Our break is still on the category I did just like it was, but I unchecked this collapse expand. So now it's going to stay expanded. Clicking on that row is not going to collapse it. And the reason why is we're going to create that clickable image to expand and collapse instead. So the first thing I did was I created a couple of images over here. These are just hidden little images off to the side. See, I made them not visible for the pluses and minuses. Don't have to do that piece. The reason I did that piece is because I created these image controls with those little buttons on them over here. Those images are now in my SCM, packaged up with my project. I don't have to worry about making sure those get included if I'm sharing this project with anyone. You know, if I just change that image over here by code, and then there's nothing for WebDev to know, oh, those images need to be included in the project. So that's the reason I do these little hidden images over here, is now the image files that I'm using dynamically over here are already included in the project. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so now the next thing we do is we create a clickable image, And when you create an image, you'll see that you can create an image, a clickable image, thumbnail, healing corner, all kinds of great and wonderful things. I created a clickable image, and I used the plus image just so that I had something to look at design time, but because we're really controlling that image dynamically, so it doesn't really matter what image we use there, so I just used the plus. Then if we come down here, you see that it's defined as a clickable image, and you also need to make sure that you define it as dynamic. If you define it as static, then the browser doesn't expect that image to change, and your dynamic code won't work right. The image won't flip back and forth like you would expect it to. Then, as we saw a moment ago, we defined the attribute. We linked it to that image that we just created. It's not linked to anything in the database because, or in our query, because we're going to handle it by code. But we need an attribute, and that's a important thing to understand about loopers is you don't do much work directly with the controls. You work with attributes, and the attributes work with the controls. And the reason why is, as far as the world's concerned, there's only one instance of that image control. So if you try to do something in your code to that image control, you'd be affecting every row because there's only one image control that you can reference. But the attributes are linked to that control on that specific row. So now you can change the attribute, and then that attribute affects that image for that row. So since we created an attribute and linked it to the image control, to the image property, if we change the attribute for one particular row, we're actually changing the image that's being displayed in that image control. Just the same as by changing the attribute for category. In this case, we're doing it by just linking it to the query. That's how we get different category names. We're just doing this one by code instead. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually put that code in place. So on row display, I put a little bit of code in there that just, because remember, our query doesn't have any logic to do anything with the image names, and it's not linked to our query or anything. So if I didn't have this code in place, when you first display the screen, in fact, we'll just look at it and we can see that real quick. We don't have an image there because I didn't tell it any image. So
even though you defaulted,
yeah, because again, remember, it's that control is defaulted to an image, but then on the looper we said find out what your image is by looking at this attribute, and that attribute is blank because that attribute isn't getting a value from anywhere. So it's the same if I had. If we look at this looper and see the attribute for the static category is coming because it's linked to this, if I set that to none, then we wouldn't have anything in the category because, again, the attribute isn't getting any value, and that attribute is overriding what's on that control for every row. So that's what these 3 lines of code here are doing, is they're just setting up that default of a minus image on every row because we're starting with everything expanded. Then the next thing we do is we add some code behind the image for what to do when we click on it. And the first thing we do is we call it a function called looper collapse expand. That
Oh, you could have you could have actually changed the concept of this and started at a mall collapse too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Somebody asked a question. Can we allow editing the answers with edit control? Is that advisable? Yeah. Um, Somebody's typing, but not yet. That's cool. I think I'd started collapse though. So yeah. So you can also, with this, say that if one's open, the other's closed, right? So it would actually have to go through all of them to interrogate if what state they're in. Uh, okay. Let's see. Albert's asking, starting out on PC Soft World WinDev, is this looper functionally available in there as well? Probably more easy. Yeah. Okay. So are you anything else? Nothing else on questions? Good. That's fantastic. I think I'm gonna go for a walk then. Since I'm up. All right. Thank you very much, Chris said, and Wolfgang's typing something. As usual, we'll see you in 2 weeks. You'll be back too. Okay. So I'm gonna stop the recording and have a great weekend, Pete. Thank you.